Hello everyone. This is Irene from SaugaTalks. I'm the host, and I'm so glad to have Eric Jensen today with me here virtually, because many of us working virtually now, and it's a good day to be working on Zoom. Love Zoom technology, helping me a lot, helping all my guests. So I'm completely crazy about the new opportunities we all have to connect and to exchange our wisdoms. So Eric Jensen with me today. He is a CTO and co-founder of Causality Link, which is a very cool fintech company. And we will talk to Eric today about what Causality Link stands for, why is he involved, and how is his latest work related to coronavirus pandemic and how technology helped to solve us some of these challenges. So Eric, welcome, please.
Irene, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me. And like you said, it's a good day to be on Zoom. I'm curious if you've noticed any changes in Zoom over the last 2 weeks. I read all sorts of stories about their load and some of their services being challenged. And then I also hear that both Netflix and Amazon are taking steps to kind of reduce their video quality to keep up. Have you noticed any
Personally,
changes?
yeah, personally, I'm very happy with Zoom. I can be their face of the brand if they need me to. I'm one of the many happy customers over here because all my interviews, they're virtual. They were conceived Zoom interviews actually a few months ago.
Right,
Okay,
right.
so I'm kind of on trend now. I wish we were in different situation. But point is, I'm absolutely happy customer. I have not noticed any issues. But you know what you're talking about, the slowdown, the kind of right, what tools not being able to handle the workload. This is the opportunity. This is the
Yep,
opportunity for companies to improve the products, to know where exactly to invest and where
right.
exactly the demand and outcome will be. So I take it as, again, as a great sign of finding the right niche where when the investment and growth will come from. So
Right.
talk to us please, what are you focusing on? Because I know fintech news we're all watching, we are kind of interested, but you are more than fintech right now, I would say, right?
Right. Yeah. Fintech is a fairly broad category of companies, and many of those you hear about are the payment processors of the world, or the kind of the back office, the hot startups that are looking at how we replace banking for personal usage, and companies like Marcus with Goldman Sachs and Stripe. Those are the kind of the big names behind fintech. And rather than jumping into those kind of broad, I guess you could call them plumbing type solutions, we were really interested in capital markets. We were interested in investing. We were interested in how an investor or a portfolio manager or an analyst could keep up with this vast volume of information that's just being inundated on us through television, through email, through the web. And really, as a personal investor, I was really frustrated that I had a relatively small number of equities that I was monitoring and keeping track of. And waking up in the morning, I had a process of trying to digest all the news before the market opened, so I could kind of understand what I expected that might be occurring in the first few minutes, and if I wanted to make a trade. And I really felt like the amount of time I had to invest was disproportionate to those number of things I was interested in, and that the quality of information that I was receiving was very inconsistent. And so, for instance, some days I'd wake up and there would be a small dip in one of my stocks, and I would spend 15 minutes and be reminded, oh gosh, that was just a dividend. That's nothing to be concerned about. That's business as usual. Whereas maybe another day there would be some big pop, and one of my stocks would be up 10%, and I would be, of course, happy about that. But I want to understand why. I want to say, is this something that I should be reacting to, or is it just good news? And spending 20 minutes to find out that they made an announcement and that there was something positive happening didn't seem like a reasonable amount of time for somebody that was really just an individual, a home gamer, I guess you would call them.
Mhm.
So, of course, this isn't a 100% match to how I would expect a professional analyst would be behaving, because their business and their livelihood is connected to really staying on top of this, and they do have information that's not publicly available. But I had to guess that they would empathize with the problem. And so I had the feeling that we could do something more significant that would keep listening to all this information and would make me aware of what I should be reading. And in taking on that adventure, we realized quickly that the world is inundated by the same information, by very noisy signals. We're told every day how stock prices are changing and how estimates are not coming in as expected and why profits are down. But there's not enough explanation, in my mind, happening often enough to really justify that commitment that people are making in reading the news. And the problem is that as an instrument, there's kind of a limit to how much context you can reasonably embed in an article that you're writing. You write an article and you have to make some assumptions about what your audience already knows as a human being who's been participating in the economy for many years. Before we really jumped in, I was commenting about news like the price of oil changing. And I'm sure this is something that we can all understand as something that's present in the news. You'll see it everywhere from CNN to Yahoo News. The price of oil is down 10% today. And I think it's really interesting how the human brain is able to connect all sorts of implications of those changes to their daily lives, whether that be something as simple as filling up the gas tank or buying an airline ticket. Those are all the effects that we feel and think that are kind of positive news behind the price of oil changing, even though there's kind of some subtle underlying impacts that might be occurring to the overall economy and the strength of the economy that are a little bit longer term. Or if you're an investor and you're interested in fixed income and maybe you have some investments in companies like Chevron or Exxon, you might be worried that decrease is actually going to impact your own day-to-day in a negative way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you're touching on a very, understandable, because I'm representing very broad audience, okay? And we are not investors with, I would say, very deep knowledge. I myself not. I have, yes, my husband who is a little bit knowledgeable, but I guess, yeah, there are lots of people still don't understand all the data sources, how do you digest, because there's not, it's not like we're lacking data now, okay?
Right.
Data is everywhere, okay? Everyone have their own tool, everyone have their own, I don't know, trusted source, okay?
Right.
What I wanted to hear is that you somehow was able to get this data that we all buried in right now about coronavirus. What is the outbreak current, present, and future state, of course, and we all watching from healthcare perspective, personal, economical, right, business, you name it, cultural, social, all these aspects of our life that are affected now. So I did find the research that Causality Link put out there, where you focused on, I guess, applying the technology that you were creating for analysts and for investors, applying it to these different data sources and giving it some clarity in this moment. Can you speculate on this, please?
Fantastic. Yes, I'd be happy to. So there have been a number of others who have focused on purely looking at this data. How can I read about somebody announcing that something surprising has happened? Well, the coronavirus is no longer surprising, right? We're constantly looking at the numbers and we're trying to extrapolate, will the curve flatten? How long will this last? But this is almost secondary in terms of trying to understand what the impact will be on a personal level or on a financial level. And so the essence of Causality Link as a company has been, rather than simply trying to unearth that data point to try to figure out where the fevers are and how the numbers are increasing, which there are a lot of people doing, let's try to understand how experts are explaining what the impact will be. How are they saying that after the coronavirus has occurred, we believe that the number of bookings on the airlines will be decreased by 50% over the next 6 months? How can we actually take those two data points now and remember that somebody who has a good track record and who has explained things accurately in the past has made this connection. And so the focus of our NLP has been on, let's unearth these explanations and let's remember those explanations so that when we get the next data point and we understand that, oh my gosh, now the numbers have increased in terms of cases another 10%, which might mean the impact is going to be felt for another 3 weeks, we can automatically make that connection again and say, look, that piece of knowledge, that's not going to change instantaneously. The relationship between the number of people that are ill and the number of people who are willing to make an airline purchase it might be changing, by some proportion, by some percentage, but the link is still there. And so on an individual basis, we can remember these small links, but we think it's even more interesting to say, let's take A causes B and remember that, and then let's remember that B causes C. Let's start to create a chain so that each one of these data points can be connected, and we can say, is there an influence? Is there a tie-in? Or has nobody ever made that connection in the history of our entire knowledge base, which at this point is about 80 million documents spanning 8 years worth of content. And we think it's even though people are often making new, they're coming up with kind of new ways to say the same thing. So COVID-19 and coronavirus, this isn't really something that we had seen a lot of prior to January of this year, but the idea of an epidemic and what could that cause and how could that influence society has been discussed for many years. Of course, there was Ebola, there was MERS, there was SARS. These are all examples of when people were saying, if this problem becomes worse, here's how we think it will impact financial indicators. And we can learn from that and we can reapply that. And so the research that we've published and we've made public is all based on not just looking for the presence of these key terms, but it's what have we learned over reading all of these documents, and how can we trace how people are they're kind of rediscovering these elements of the model, and where are they kind of changing their mind, where is there something unique occurring, and where is something that's predictable occurring in terms of those trends. So for instance, people talked a lot about how water supplies could be endangered in the case of an epidemic. And we know that people have been worried about that with coronavirus. There's been news even from my own local utility here in Sandy, Utah, saying, gosh, is this a problem? And I think this actually led to some of the behavior we saw where people were buying bottled water like crazy for a few weeks. Mm-hmm. And the government came back and said, look, we see no evidence of that being a problem with this particular virus. Don't worry. And so that's interesting because it's one of those kind of conditional things that people understand as a potential issue that we can kind of raise a flag on a little bit earlier, get it in people's mind, and then let them make their own decision as the truth comes to become apparent.
Absolutely, the value is tremendous, and of course the favorite commoner kind of terms, causation and correlation. Okay, so I hope you will have better answers for all of that, because we all have different logic, what chain of kind of events we're building in our brains, right? So can you comment on some of the findings you saw where it could be not obvious at all, right? What causes what, for what reason, or it just happened to be, right, this simple correlation?
Yeah, no, that's a perfect point. So people often bring up what is the difference between those two terms. I don't understand. Fundamentally, correlation is when you see two data points or two data charts that seem to be moving together. How often does the price of oil go down when the dollar weakens? Or conversely, how often do things occur? And there's been a lot of efforts by which people are basically feeding as much data into systems that are statistical or that use machine learning, and they are coming back and saying, oh gosh, we found a high degree of correlation, a very tight connection between A and B. But really, to your point, there's no necessarily way to prove that A did cause B, or that there's just a coincidence going on. And so rather than our system trying to invent the causation, we're using the wisdom of crowds, and we're trying to understand when people say that A caused B, and we're taking an approach where we're essentially trusting them through the scale and the reach of our platform. So what I mean by that is the fact that 80% of the citations in the world that say B happened because of A, that's a pretty strong piece of evidence that in fact there's a high likelihood that A did cause B. And even more subtly, we think it's interesting because even if A didn't cause B, if 80% of the world believe it did, there's an argument to be made that you should still be understanding that connection, because the way people will react and the way people will make decisions it has already been influenced by that belief, whether it's true or not.
Yep, absolutely. So what drawn me to your research is a very simple formula. So you're looking at 3 stages, you call them: people, demand, and supply. How do you approach? Because to me right now, it's not clear at all. I mean, this is like very, very high level. So how do you define these different entities, and what are the mechanism and findings? Okay, so what's the most valuable, I would say, outcome you find? Mm-hmm.
Right. So we were observing that all of the discussion initially was in fact about the pandemic, about the spread of the virus and the number of people that were being impacted, and people were starting to forecast how that could move across the world. And of course, that has implications that there are causal links tied to people not being able to report for work, to people who are not going to be able to produce the things that we're interested in. But when we were first measuring that, we were just seeing it as a number of events that people were recording. So in our data model, we have this idea that there's a category of event and there's a location where people are discussing it. And we saw this emergence of discussion of an epidemic in China. And we saw that emergence move on and talk about South Korea and talk about Japan. And then we saw all of a sudden it was being picked up on this cruise ship. And as soon as that started to occur, we started to see some discussion and some murmurs around how that will actually impact the indicators, the financial aspects of companies. And the cruise ship is a very specific example, but even before that, people were saying, gosh, will Apple, who's really using a lot of supply from China, be able to continue to sell their products if this disease spreads significantly across China? And so we categorize our key performance indicators, our KPIs, in various ways. And one of the schemes we use is, are these tied to the supply of actual products and how they're being produced, or is it tied to the demand for products and how they're being purchased? And so as these things were spreading and we saw this acceleration, it was obvious right away that people were seeing that the price of oil and the price of energy was declining, because there's not going to be as much demand in a time when companies are not producing, when people are at home. But there was a later wave when people were saying, gosh, if there's a decrease in the supply, that demand will also be impacted. And so energy is a good example where we didn't hear a lot of people saying there's going to be less oil produced. But on the discretionary front, where people were discussing the cruise ships and hotels, that impact was much more apparent. And so because we saw this kind of discrepancy between supply and demand, we produced these reports to say, look, this is where people are really focused today. This is where they feel the impact, and there's a discrepancy here that's interesting, and maybe it's worth making that information more publicly available, because the implications maybe haven't been completely felt by the market. Of course, this was 3 weeks ago, and things have changed quite a bit since then, and I think across the board, the impact has been felt. But Pierre, my co-founder, and others in the company were interested in making that information public as soon as we found it.
Absolutely. So what are your next steps? What's the plan to proceed? Because I understand you generated a dashboard. Is it a dynamic tool? What's your kind of plans for the future?
So we were lucky in some sense in that we'd been working on the architecture to support creating real-time dashboards for many months. And we had a real-time tool that lets you look at individual companies and individual industries, but we felt like it was really a big technical challenge to be able to ask questions that were fairly complicated about really gigabytes of data and be able to deliver something that was actually updated on a regular basis. And so with this coronavirus example, we said, look, we need to look at all the data on a regular basis. We need to be able to save that information and update it every hour. And we were able to accomplish that. And so the system is reading in real time about 40,000 articles per day. If the article comes in and it's not in English, we have 18 languages that we can translate into English before we analyze. And what we do is integrate that information and we categorize it. So we understand right away whether this is a text that's talking about 5 companies or talking about an event. You know, how is this relevant? And we basically tag that and put that into an index where we can then efficiently ask questions. So all of that is to say there's a big machine in place behind the scenes that's applying actually hundreds of CPUs simultaneously to read all of this, to put it in a place where we can ask these questions. And then what we do is every hour we update our question set and we say, of all the news that has occurred in 2020, how many of those talk about the coronavirus? And of those articles, how many actually explain what could be the impact? That's the causal link that is more informative in our minds than just simply saying there was 5,000 articles. Nobody can do anything with that. But saying that of those articles, we found 35 references to somebody saying a company that's based in Germany will have their sales decline, that's actionable. And by putting that in a bar that actually compares that to every other country, you can see where the focus is shifting. You can see where people are observing implications and they're starting to understand, and also where they're starting to forecast, oh gosh, this could be next. The US could be next, Mexico could be next, and they're starting to kind of move their attention, as well as you start to see some fatigue. You know, when the same news comes out over and over again, it's not always talked about on the same scale. So for instance, this week, we're actually seeing less chatter in the last 7 days talking about the impact of coronavirus to company KPIs than we saw last week. And some of that is because we're starting to see some relief. We're seeing movements by the Senate and the House to approve bills that will hopefully stabilize the market. And so the panic, I think, may be passing. It's a little too soon to say that for certain, but it's always fascinating to understand that fatigue and the fact that some of these links are obvious, but they're easy to forget. And our system doesn't forget them.
No, this is fantastic, because my next question was, of course, when we, slicing and dicing information in our brain, you know, for me at least, it's kind of important to understand what's happening worldwide, what's happening at federal level, right? What measures are taking here at the state level. I'm in Connecticut, so I'm of course watching, right, what are the local authorities thinking about it. And even in my town, you know, I'm very happy to see selectmen. We don't have mayor, we have selectmen here who is addressing the public and certain steps they're taking. So, and to individual level. So I'm wondering how the data sources that you're analyzing, are they pretty much all these big worldwide sources, or what's your kind of pre-selection triage, you know, when you go?
Yeah. So we tried to take a couple of approaches to try to sample kind of both best of breed and broadest of breed. So for best of breed, we have some very specific sites that we think are wealths of information that are actually free and public. And so we crawl some of those sites, we try to extract their knowledge, and then we actually redirect our customers when they find something interesting back to that content. So we can just show them the signals. We can say, hey, there's an opinion worth reading over on this site. Take a look. And when they select it, they actually go back and participate in that site, and maybe they become a subscriber. So I think that's actually a win. We also have a large content provider that's a partner, and they are re-syndicating news from all over the globe. So this includes 7 of the 10 largest newspapers by readership across the world. It includes government sites that are publishing things about patents and about IP protection. It includes all sorts of kind of, I guess you would say, the broadest set of public news and analysis you can imagine. We do a little bit of work to discard things that we think aren't relevant to our audience. You know, the news about maybe some types of sports and events that are local that might not be applicable. We discard just to avoid misinterpreting more than anything. It's not a matter of scale, but you know, there's all sorts of nomenclature that is more appropriate to entertainment or the sports that we don't necessarily care so much about. So we might filter those out. But we think it's interesting to be able to say, let's take the broadest possible signal. Let's understand the crowd wisdom in terms of diversity, in terms of different cultures and their focuses. And then let's compare that to some of this best of breed so we can put things in context.
Perfect, perfect. This is great. I lost my video first time, yes. You know, since I was too proud of Zoom here. Okay, and
I probably jinxed you.
That's the day. All right, Eric, thank you so very much. Would you like us to link from this video to the dashboard, to Causality Link?
I would love either or both. I mean, certainly from our website, we have a link at the bottom to our dashboard, but that's something that I think is relevant to a wider crowd than some of our other work. And so I'd love to be able to have your audience take a look. And of course, we'd love to hear feedback about what we can do to make it even more meaningful. We've been doing some work in the last week around adding extra layers of data to what we're presenting. And so, for instance, today we have a tree map that is showing this breakdown between supply and demand and where the focus is on each segment or industry. We'd love to add some data that says, well, within those actual segments, there's actually some winners and losers. You know, the world is focused on these areas, but some of them are going to do well, like Costco, for instance, and Walmart, perhaps, and Amazon are actually doing well and seeing more sales, whereas the airlines and cruise ship companies are obviously being hurt. And so being able to add a little bit of color there to say, here's who we think the world is saying will win and lose, should be coming in the next couple of weeks.
Fantastic, fantastic. And let's continue this content cross-pollination, because absolutely I want to spread the good word about the new tool. And I know in technology you'll be evolving. Okay, so things I'm sure will be changing.
Absolutely.
But this is perfect. I mean, this is all the opportunity to apply your talent, your knowledge, your investment, right, in the area where you think there'll be more demand.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we're very audacious. We're trying to build a model of the world and every company in it. And that's something that wouldn't have been possible before the last few years. But it's more than just machine learning. We're doing AI, we're applying those new cutting edge technologies, but we're also balancing it with symbolic AI, which is a more traditional discipline that can put things into context. And I think marrying those approaches and not having to teach the machine the things that are obvious, because we can do that with rules, but also detect new things that are occurring by these fantastic machine learning models is going to really transform the way we consume content, the way we read, the way we find what's interesting and relevant, and the context around that has been so hard to perfect in the past. So we're really excited, and I really appreciate that you were willing to listen to my quasi-technical deep dive into some of the things we're doing, but also good at pulling me out and making that more relevant to everybody that's so concerned, not only for their retirement and their own investments, but just the economy as a whole. We need to keep together and understand how we can recover quickly. And I think Causality Link can help.
We're all in it together, and knowledge is power, okay? And clarity is better than uncertainty. So that's why I love to be working with technology companies like yours, because bringing some of this clarity to this world, right, means a lot to all of us. Eric, thank you so very much. You're welcome to come back to SaugaTalks to comment on progress when you're ready to report something fantastic, next time.
I will absolutely keep you looped in. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Appreciate it very much. Stay safe, stay well. Okay, take care of yourself and everyone around you. So we'll get through this for sure. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks.